My name is Sara Speicher. I'm Communication Officer for the World Council of Churches. I'd like to welcome you to this press conference that looks at meeting the challenges of the faith responses to the AIDS epidemic. We have quite a number of examples here, so a large panel of people who will speak from different national and international perspectives. I will ask each one to make a short presentation with their particular perspective, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'd like to first address Reverend Claudia Soliette Lopez from the Nicaraguan Lutheran Church of Faith and Hope about her work in Nicaragua addressing HIV. Claudia.
Thank you. I am an ordained pastor of the Lutheran Church in Nicaragua. I work with a community of people with HIV. And just to let you know a little about the situation of AIDS in Nicaragua, by the end of the 2015, we had a total of 10,405 people diagnosed with HIV registered through the monitoring system of the Ministry of Health. But the organization that work with the topic of HIV, we think that we can multiply these numbers by 10. The stigma and discrimination that remains towards people battling with HIV is a very big problem. The majority of our people grow up without proper guidance and education regarding sexual and reproductive health. One of the main reasons is because the schools do not teach sex education. Amidst this scenario, the Nicaraguan Lutheran Church Faith and Hope unfolds in response to HIV in two ways. The first is prevention, which we started working with 13 years ago. We have produced two tools to help teach people. One is a video that provides general information about HIV, but also our faith message. The other tool is a series of documents entitled HIV, Neither Sin Nor Divine Punishment. We named this after a discussion with people of other denominations who do not approve our work because for them, the people with HIV are impure and sinful. These documents have Bible studies that reaffirm that we believe and follow a God of love who loves us all equally. These documents also include information about sexual and reproductive health, HIV, and human rights. Apart from this, we have teaching activities like the information fairs, forums, lectures, and a soccer league between different schools. The kids in Nicaragua, they love to play soccer, so their requirement to participate in this league is that the individual has to receive a workshop on HIV and sexual health. The other way we work is with comprehensive care program that helps support people with HIV. 1 Corinthians 12:26-27 says that if one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. So we say that although we are not infected with HIV, we are all affected by it. We work with people who are not just rejected for having HIV, but also for their low economic position, for having little or not education, for their sexual preferences, etc. Through a holistic approach, we try to be a means of healing for these people, bringing them hope and showing them the love of God with pastoral accompaniment and with programs that tries to solve their needs. An important part of our work is with children. They are who suffer the most because of the stigma and discrimination. They are rejected by their peers in the school and by their neighbors. They are never invited to a birthday party because of their HIV condition or just for being related to someone who is HIV positive. Because of this, the youth ministry in the church launches a Christmas party every year so they can laugh, eat, play, and receive all of our tokens of love. We do not have finances of organization for our activities. We do everything with own efforts motivated by the love of God and through private donations. As I said in one of my sermons, I don't have HIV in my blood, but I have it in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Claudia. I'll turn next to Anggia Ermarini, from Indonesia, from Fatayat NU, which is a Muslim organization that has over 80 million members. Anggia, could you share a bit about the work that you do in Indonesia?
Thank you. Okay, my name is Anggia. I'm from Fatayat NU, is Muslim organization in Indonesia. The problem in Indonesia now, the highest number who are affected by HIV is a housewife. This is the problem. It's very, very big problem. And we are, as a Muslim organization, we already done, we have an outreach worker, about 400 outreach worker who reach the key population in throughout about 56 cities, 56 districts in Indonesia. And also we have a program, we give the support to the HIV positive, people living with HIV. We have about 300 workers, they have to reach the people living with HIV and give the support, give the social, psychology support, give the social support. Sometimes we have, they have to accompany the people to the services, to the hospital, and etc. And another thing is we we have a training for the religious leader, in a local religious leader. So the training is, we have the theological foundation. Yeah, I'm sorry, my English is very poor, but I hope you understand. Okay, we give the theological foundation why we are as a human being, as a ambassador of God to the earth, to involve, to take care, or to give the attention for this problem. In the point of view of a religious leader in my organization, that the case of HIV is a global emergency. So we call this is a collective obligation in our regulation of Islamic regulation. We call it fardu kifaya, means this is an obligation for collective. So we have to have a certain a group who are really serious effort to respond HIV. And in the training also, we talk about HIV, what is it about, how to transmit, and the end of the training, the participant come to the VCT side. So the religious leader not only giving speech, but also give the model, give the example that come or visit to the VCT side, to the services is not, it is okay. Because, you know, the problem why the transmission is always going on is because people don't want to go to the VCT site. In the society, if we come to the VCT site, the population, the community, the people, other people will say that we are not good person. We are maybe we are a naughty person. So when religious leader give the example, this is very, very good, very effective model, so that the people will really willing to go to the VCT site. That's why once we get the VCT site, we know the status, then we can manage how the life process. I mean, if they are positive, so how we can stop to not transfer to other people. If they are negative, keep it in negative. So this is not very easy in Indonesia, because not all people that realize that the problem is already in our family. they say still that the problem is away from the family, especially in the Muslim community. So we have a manual. Yeah, we have manual. We adapt to from the very variety of manual to have a training, or what is it? The book can guide the religious leader to be able to talk about HIV. And we have once we have a book who we called it HIV in Islamic perspective, and then we have a book that provide what is it to Sermon Friday, that every Friday we in Islamic community we have a Sermon Friday, and we provide the topic that that their speech is about HIV or whatever, but relates to HIV. We already formulate this what is it this book, and also the others is about what is it the true story from our community when they get HIV with in this body. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing about the collective Muslim teaching and how you're working at reducing stigma and those practical access questions for vulnerable populations. I will turn next to the Philippines and Father Wilfredo, who is the Executive Assistant to the Supreme Bishop of the Philippine Independent Church.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Wilfredo. I'm part of the delegation coming from the National Council of Churches in the Philippines. I come from the Philippine Independent Church, which is a local indigenous church. Pertaining to the program on HIV prevention, the NCCP has an ongoing one called Prevention, Not Condemnation, which focuses on efforts on arousing and sensitizing church leaders and church people in general towards the eradication of stigma and discrimination surrounding PL-HIV, and towards mobilizing the material and human resources of the churches as part of the broader and wider global initiative and network towards putting an end to HIV and AIDS pandemic. The NCCP program engages church leaders and church people to HIV intervention by offering them accurate medical information, conversation opportunities with people who have contracted HIV, and deepening their understanding of the church as an inclusive community of faith through scriptural and theological studies. This NCCP program puts strong emphasis on the education of church leaders and church people in general, I say, and to help them understand the nature of HIV pandemic, the manner of HIV infections, the people vulnerable to HIV infection, and how the risk of HIV infection and transmission can be reduced if not totally prevented. Knowledge which they can use in turn to sensitize their own respective communities and thus end HIV prejudice among Christian communities of faith in the Philippines. The HIV intervention approach, this HIV intervention approach is the NCCP's principal method in battling the stigma and discrimination surrounding PL-HIV, correcting the myths and the misconceptions about HIV, which are breeding grounds for stigma and discrimination, constitutes a very important step in this effort. The NCCP believes that by raising the number of enlightened clergy and lay people and organizing them under an HIV stigma reduction campaign would strongly ensure the creation not only of safe spaces for people living with HIV, but rather achieving the nobler duty of forming safe communities for PL-HIV, communities of faith which are inclusive and non-isolating of PL-HIV. As Christians, we begin by first recognizing that stigma dehumanizes and marginalizes. Stigma isolates. The good news that comes out from this realization is that churches can offer an effective counter-narrative and counter-practice to stigma and discrimination by churches themselves becoming a welcoming, accepting, and affirming communities for PLHIV. And NCCP started by listening to the voices of the vulnerable and the excluded, and continue to critically look into the way the churches may have contributed to their stigma. The NCCP has pursued its HIV testing campaign among church leaders and church people, reaching out to 5,000 bishops, priests, lay leaders, men, women, and young people in the last 2 years, most of them participating in HIV testing. And this gives to us, this is giving expression to an active faith which works through charity and justice, expressed in the word solidarity with people living with HIV. So the NCCP's effort to rally its member churches to become more compassionate and caring communities of faith to PLHIV and their families stand on a solid theological ground. This is the theology that affirms the inherent worth of every human person as a child of God. And this is the theology that affirms human dignity and abundant life for all, as mentioned in John chapter 10, verse 10. But as a political statement, the NCCP sees HIV and AIDS issues as relating to human rights. In either case, HIV and AIDS issues are justice issues for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I would highlight as a concrete example the poster campaign that is part of some of these efforts that you were mentioning, in which church leaders have been willing to put themselves on posters to say, I am a priest, and I have got tested for HIV, and this is showing the General Secretary of the NCCP. And these have been put around the country for a very effective response. I'd like to turn now to Rebecca Duerst from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America as a bridge between the projects on the ground at the national level and what the Lutheran Church is doing at the international level to address some of the challenges.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Sarah, for the invitation to be part of this panel. My name is Rebecca Duerst, and I am the Director for International Development and Disaster Response with the Global Mission Unit of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. For the ELCA, HIV and AIDS continues to be a key priority. It is one topic for which we have developed a strategy that guides our engagement both globally and domestically in the United States. As part of that strategy, in 2009, we made a commitment to raise $10 million US dollars to support HIV and AIDS work and provide $1 million per year in support for HIV and AIDS projects and programs over the next 10 years. We have exceeded that goal every year since that commitment was made. In the ELCA, we use the accompaniment approach, which means walking together and listening and responding to the priorities lifted up by our global companion churches and partner organizations. As a result, we support a broad range of programs that include HIV prevention, testing and counseling, treatment, and care and support for people living with HIV and AIDS. Importantly, these projects are frequently a part of an integrated response that addresses the social, structural, and systemic conditions, particular poverty, gender equality, stigma, and marginalization of key populations that both drive the spread of HIV and prevent people living with HIV who need it most to access care and resources. A strength of this holistic approach, especially when implemented by members of the faith community, is that it allows these initiatives to be whole person-centered and grounded in relationships. Being in relationships with people who are different from us, listening and sharing our stories can help break down the barriers that stigma and labels create. Moving forward, I think some of the biggest challenges for the faith community are first, addressing stigma that members of our community continue to perpetuate, and stigma not only towards people living with HIV, but also towards key populations. And not only stigma, but racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression that are ingrained within our society. And number two, to grapple with the fact that, for whatever reason, we tend to rationalize our own immoral behavior when we judge someone else's behavior to be immoral, and forget their inherent dignity and human rights as fellow human beings. It seems that we all understand stigma is the main driver of the epidemic, and so accordingly, it seems to me that we are aiming to end the wrong thing. The problem is no longer HIV in and of itself. HIV is the effect of another problem. The problem is stigma. All of the isms are the problem. And as people who hold that stigma and believe those isms, we are also part of the problem. As Charlize said on Monday, the fact that society values white, male, straight, cisgender, and rich lives more than others is the problem. As people of faith, we need to address this injustice. In my work, I get to visit projects and programs working toward a vision of a more just society all over the world. And while these projects may be small and might seem to be disjointed, from my perspective, I see little flames of hope everywhere. The faith community is a key player in shaping beliefs and actions, and if we join together and reinvigorate momentum, we can bend this arc toward justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much in terms of addressing that vast range of Lutheran services that are addressing HIV and the isms that are attached to it. I'd like to turn now to Reverend Edwin Sanders of the Metropolitan Community Church in Nashville, Tennessee in the United States, also on how, through church theology, we are addressing HIV and the isms.
I think one of the things that I have to say first about Metropolitan Church is we refer to ourselves as being Metropolitan Interdenominational Church, but even the way in which I identify the role that I play, and that is that I am known as the senior servant. In many instances, what we've discovered in our communities is that some of the titles and some of the ways in which we've identified ourselves has been one of the basis upon which there has been the initial point at which people feel that there is something that is a point of division between who they are, because so many of the titles, the title of pastor and the like, end up very often being titles that are associated with some of the things that have been alienating to so many of the people that we are trying to serve. In the United States, we have discovered how important it is to focus on this whole business of being inclusive. As a congregation, one of the things that we say is that we're a community of believers, inclusive of all and alienating to none, leading the way to spiritual growth by sharing God's love with the world. In some ways that sounds like a very simple statement, but yet it's a very complex and very demanding statement when we talk about being inclusive of all and alienating to none. We have determined that it's important for us to deal with HIV in a way that makes it clear that HIV has a way of which it is impacted by all of the things that are very often referred to as the isms and the phobias that are part of the societal reality that is alienating and discriminating and fragmenting of so many, with people in so many ways. We say that one of the things that we do is that we're an inclusive, reconciling, and engaged congregation. The business of inclusivity we talk about in terms of being radically inclusive, because what we have to do is move beyond all the socioeconomic ways in which people end up being excluded. We have to deal with all the ways in which culturally and other dynamics of society are at work. We talk about the fact in the United States that the reality of racism is something that has an impact that touches every dimension of the lives of every person in the United States. But it's not just true in the United States, it's the global South. There's a reason why when we look at where the preponderance of this disease very often ends up being reflected, it is in places where indeed the dynamics of race end up being a part. I would also suggest to you that it has to do with the whole question of poverty. So there's poverty, there's stigma, there's homophobia, there's racism, there's sexism, and you can go on down that list. It can be Islamophobia, it can be the many other ways in which we look at people and use it as a basis of dismissing and discounting who they are. We spend a lot of time making sure that we address those things forthrightly, and the church is the place where too often those kinds of attitudes have been perpetuated by the ways in which we have relegated people to positions in life where we think of them as being those who somehow fall outside of the circle of God's love and inclusion. People who, because of their gender, sexual orientation, or how it is that they live their lives, ends up being a part of what immediately allows people to condemn and allows people to be dismissive of who they are. we spend a lot of time emphasizing how important it is to make sure that we are continually in proximity to those who are the disinherited, the disenfranchised, those who for all kinds of reasons have been dismissed and discounted. That all ends up being important for us. We feel it's very consistent with the sacred writings that we embrace, but we also work very hard at making sure that we identify the ways in which there is common ground within the sacred writings of other faith traditions. Clearly, we are grounded initially in that which is a part of what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ, but in many ways we feel that Jesus Christ was radically inclusive. After all, when you look at many of the teachings, many of the people he was willing to touch, others would not touch. Many who he was willing to embrace, others would not embrace. Many who he was willing to address, others would not address. And one of the things that we've done is determine that we have to move beyond anything that says to us that anybody is excluded, but rather everyone has to be excluded. It has to be included and move beyond where anyone is excluded. Let me say also that one of the things that we have found to be very important is what we do with our sacred spaces. One of the things that's very important for us is that we have what is considered the language you've heard already as safe space. We have what we talk about promoting the idea of sanctuaries for people who for one reason or another find themselves not easily being accepted. But one of the ways in which we do that is to make sure that we're always providing an environment in which those things which are most basic and fundamental to people are needed. We've run the gamut. We've been involved in doing this work now for 33 years. Sometimes people ask how 33 years is possible for us, but the first person to die in the history of our 36-year-old congregation died from AIDS. And one of the things that we have had to do, well, actually one of the opportunistic diseases that the person was vulnerable to because of the weakened immune system with AIDS. But the fact is that what we have seen is that from that period of time when we first recognized that this is something the church had to address, we began by doing education. We moved on to do prevention. We then developed the capacity to develop direct services. Then we moved to the point of care and treatment, even now to where we have a primary care clinic. But what we also have been concentrating on is trying to help other congregations understand how they can do this work with the resource and with the potential that they already have amongst themselves. I appreciate it globally and nationally the ways in which we need to have resources that come from outside of our congregation and our worshiping bodies. But a lot of what we already have provides an important part of what's needed, especially when you can find ways to collaborate with persons who do the things that you don't do. But the safe space ends up being at the heart, at the core, and at the center of who we are. We work hard every day to make sure that we show and try to demonstrate to others. We have a capacity building initiative that's allowed us to be able to work in 21 of the 50 states in the United States, as well as some basic initiatives that are focused here in South Africa, particularly in this area of KwaZulu-Natal. And in those instances, what we're doing is creating partnerships between individual congregations and institutional needs here. We know that the problems that we're dealing with are institutional, that they're systemic, and they're structural. There are ways in which some of the stereotypical ways in which we look at problems of racism and sexism and homophobia are not enough. We have to go beyond the things that too often we deal with as the superficial manifestations of how people see and deal with others, and understand that it's rooted in the systems, it's rooted in the way in which business is done, it's rooted in the language that we use, it's rooted in the ways in which we think. So we believe that we have to be about the business of developing belief systems that take us beyond the ordinary and move us into the realm where we can see the depths of the problem. I always say that when we talk about how Jesus looked at people in a way that was radically inclusive, my analogies I often say, you have to have the eye of a telescope, you have to have the eye of a microscope, and you have to have the image that you see in a mirror. Because indeed there are things that are global, there are things that are deeply internal, but there's also the things that we bring in terms of our prejudices and our biases too often to the problem, which ends up getting in the way of us being able to effectively respond, even when we're well-intended. So that's a little bit of who we are.
Thank you very much, Edwin Sanders. And for our final comment, I'm going to turn to Reverend J.P. Mokgethi-Heath, the policy advisor on HIV and theology of the Church of Sweden, but also one of the founders of the International Network of Religious Leaders Living with or Personally Affected by HIV.
Thank you so much. As we sit here in 2016, we find ourselves not even halfway to where we need to be in terms of addressing everything that we will need to get to the goals that have been set for us and that we have participated in setting as churches through the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. One of the responses that the worldwide church has entered into obviously has been through the most recent Central Committee meeting for the World Council of Churches in Trondheim. And in Trondheim, a statement was prepared recommitting churches to accelerating their responses to HIV. Part of that acceleration process is getting people to know their HIV status. Today, we're sitting with a total number of people living with HIV of close to 37 million. Of those, we have reached 17 million with treatment related to HIV. In terms of the current World Health Organization protocols, every person who tests HIV positive should be on treatment the day they test. And so we have a treatment gap of 20 million. And that 20 million is the most difficult to reach 20 million. That 20 million is the people who are not necessarily in our urban settings. These are people in rural settings, and these are people on the fringes of our society and of our theology. And they are on the fringes of our society and theology because we have pushed them there. We have, through our own messages, created an environment which makes people feel less than welcome in our communities of faith. And we are the ones who have to bridge the gap, to make the step, to bring the margins closer to us and to go to the margins. One of the examples of that gap has been here at this conference. Our interfaith networking zone in the Global Village is just across the corridor from the sex workers booth. It's a huge divide, and yet it's only a few meters. But as some of our leaders, faith leaders, like Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, was challenged to walk across and enter into the sex workers booth, he discovered that in that booth were his own parishioners, the people who he cares for, the people who he ministers to. That step is the step that we as faith community need to take if we are going to play a significant part in making a change. In the call to accelerate responses from Trondheim, we have asked people to get tested. We have asked people to know their HIV status. And this is not just if you think you're at risk, because every person who is a human being is at risk. Because this virus, the human immunodeficiency virus, is for humans. If you're a human, you're vulnerable to HIV. And our call is for every person to go and get tested. There are a number of factors that can increase your vulnerability to HIV. We've already heard stigma and discrimination are two of the main components, but others are the other factors that push people to the margins. And one of the things that we realize that if you live on the margin, you live generally with a much lower self-esteem. And a lower self-esteem is precisely one of the things that makes you less likely to feel that you need to protect yourself, that makes you less likely to feel that you are worthy to get treated, that makes you less likely to get involved in a way that protects those who you love. And we, faith community, we are the ones who have the ability, particularly, to build up self-esteem, because we have the message that every person is lovingly, joyfully, wonderfully created in the image and likeness of God, has human dignity inherent because of who they are simply as being creatures of God. And what we need to do is we need to use that message of the divine within each person to reach out in love to the ones that we might feel uncomfortable with. And we can sort out our theologies later. But our first call is to reach out in love, because that is who we are as faith community. So some of the things that we believe need to be done in terms of taking us as part of the solution, not part of the problem, in the next 14 years is reduce the stigma and discrimination, increase the access to all HIV services, defend human rights, and then particularly ensuring treatment for children. When I say that there is a treatment gap of 20 million people, it is children who are the largest treatment gap amongst that, because it's not as economically viable for the pharmaceutical companies to make drugs available to children. We need to make sure that the message gets out there that they are, of God's children, the most loved. And we need to do the challenge to get that done.
Thank you very much for this rich presentation. Very full, because you can get part of the gamut of the faith-based response to HIV. Because we started late, we're running a little bit late, but I did want to see if there were any questions that you had that you would like to ask for the panelists. I'll start up here, or I'll start back there. If you could introduce yourself and address your question.
My name is Tandeka. I'm with the SABC News crew. I just wanted to know, you are in South Africa for a reason. It's because we are struggling, very much so, with the battle to HIV and AIDS. But I'm not seeing traditional leaders from South Africa in the panel. I'm not seeing representatives of faith communities in South Africa in the panel. I don't know if this is a question, but how are you involving us? How are you getting us into this path that is supposed to end the HIV and AIDS in the world at large?
Could you ask your other question then too, and then we'll do this together, or? Okay. We will come back to the first question, but I'm collecting them together.
My name is Desiree. I'm a journalist for African News Agency. I also write for Mokgethi-Heath magazine in South Africa. And I was just wondering, you're a Christian, besides you, Anggia. How do you draw the line between preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is supposed to be your number one priority, and becoming social justice warriors? Because I have to be honest with you, listening to all of you here is actually no different to listening to anybody out there. And I thought as Christians we were supposed to be in the world, not of the world. So you were the only one that I heard mentioning Jesus Christ. And then secondly, I haven't heard any of you speak about morals. It has suddenly become the bad word. It went from morals, we have to look at morals in the AIDS issue. And that was something that the church used to push. You don't have to be judgmental by saying to people, look, you have to look at your lifestyle. Is this not something that Christians are allowed to do anymore? Or is it a decision that you guys have taken on your own? Or do you feel that it's judgmental to say to somebody, say for example, you shouldn't smoke because you'll get cancer?
Sorry, they're telling, there's another conference already coming in, so these are very good questions. Well, we were delayed too, so it's sort of a domino effect. You're right, there is a gap in terms of South African leadership here on this panel. We had a press briefing yesterday with Anglican Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. And at the Faith Networking Zone, there are wonderful representatives of South African church leaders and faith leaders here that have been working very hard. And I encourage you, perhaps we can connect up later to talk about that and talk about their response. There's a challenge in terms of, there's a couple of quick responses to these very good questions on more. So JP and then Edwin. I see.
Perhaps I can just say I am a South African and I am an Anglican priest of the Anglican Church in Southern Africa. I am also a person living with HIV, and I have found that the love of God has been one of the things that has enabled me to live positively with HIV. Yes, when we first developed our statements, one of the things that I said personally is HIV is a virus, not a moral issue. And the reason that I gave that is because morality has very frequently been what pushes people to the margins of society. But I have been challenged in that to say that HIV actually is a moral issue. It is a moral issue when we keep people from the love of God because of our own judgmentalism. It is a moral issue when we are not able to get services to people simply because it's not convenient. Let me give you one example for myself as I've been in South Africa these couple of days. I was mugged on Friday. My medication was taken from me. And as I've been struggling to get my medication back, to get a script filled here, I've discovered that the medicines that have been given to me in Sweden, where I now work, are not available here. They've been given to me in Sweden to be able to counteract the adverse effects, the side effects of certain toxicity. Now, South Africa is a country which has the highest number of people on treatment, and quite obviously they will therefore be the country that is experiencing the most side effects from this medication. The fact that the medication that I have access to in Sweden is not available here is a moral issue. Because we speak about access, but we haven't spoken about equal access. Now, morality is about the way in which we love as well, the relationships that we enter into, and the way in which we take care of each other. I think that as we address HIV, the first of our responsibilities is to help people to know that they are loved and valued by God. And that helps people then to make informed decisions, in decisions of love and respect for those who they love and respect. And that means good prevention, good treatment, good care, and good support.
And good advice, but if somebody comes to you and says, I'm sleeping with 10 different people a night, I have HIV, surely you will say to them, perhaps it's time for you to relook at your lifestyle. Isn't that what you do as a moral guide, as a teacher?
I would absolutely do that, but I would first also say to them, do you know your HIV status? Have you tested? Are you on treatment? Are you using prevention? There are many steps. The first step is not just zip up your zip. There are so many different steps that you take people through in terms of making sure that you prevent new transmissions. And the first of them is to make sure that the person coming to you has their own needs met. And those needs will be get on treatment, get your viral load undetectable, make sure that you use prevention, because then you can cut to the risk of transmission to zero.
I'm going to, unfortunately, have to close it here because I know the other group is very anxious to come in and they are scheduled. But I would encourage some one-on-one conversations with the panelists afterwards. We can have a conversation back. This press conference has been live streamed and it is available as a recording so that you can view this later. Thank you very much for your participation.